Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 602. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about street vendors and flamingos, cathedrals and caves, Mayan ruins and cenotes, as we go to Merida and the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. With no further ado, let's talk about the Yucatan. I'd like to welcome back to the show Megsy and Tommo of foodfuntravel.com, who've come to talk to us about the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks for having us.
And I say welcome back to the show. They were on episode 457 talking about travel to the island of Cebu and the region around that in the Philippines last time we talked to them. But you have now been spending quite a lot of time in Mexico.
Yeah, we hit up a few other destinations between the Philippines and Mexico, but we've actually been hanging out here for about a year, which is crazy in digital nomad terms, but it's been a really amazing experience.
And Food Fun Travel is the new name for your site. That wasn't the name that you had last time you were on, but we won't mention the old name because that's just going to confuse people.
Yeah, we used to be budget travel, but now we really focus a lot more on food travel. So we are Food Fun Travel.
And fortunately, we're talking about the Yucatan. Food will come up.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Some good options there. Why should people go to the Yucatan?
Firstly, I suppose the main reason that's going to come to mind is the Mayan history. So This was the real Mayan heartland around here into Belize, into the north of Guatemala. That ancient culture before Spanish colonization left a huge influence on this region. And as we said, the food, for a start, a lot of the food here is still more Mayan than Mexican. And the architecture, the old ancient ruins of places like Chichen Itza, which I'm sure everyone's heard of, one of the wonders of the world. It's right here in the Yucatan. Also, another thing that's really important for us, because we're currently living in the city of Merida, which is the capital of the Yucatan. Mm-hmm. And that's been the Latin American Capital of Culture twice, most recently in 2017. It's the only place ever voted twice to be the capital of culture. It really is a cultural wonderland. There's just events on all the time. People get dressed up in their traditional Mayan dress, and there's music everywhere. There's street parties. It's been a really fantastic year. We spent the whole of 2017 here, and it's just been events the whole time. But it hasn't stopped. It hasn't completely stopped. There is a lot still going on.
Excellent. And I should mention that this is the second show we are doing on this region. We're going to talk about different places today, but we did an episode with Zora O'Neill, who wrote The Rough Guide to the Yucatan way back in episode 163. So something like 10 years ago. So it seemed time to come to this again. And I know that was a great episode. And we put a lot of pressure here on Megsy and Tommo because I actually went to the Yucatan after we did this episode with Zora and did what we recommended in that episode. So I'll have been to the Yucatan as well. We'll talk about some of the places that I recommend in and amongst your recommendations, but take a listen to that one also if you're interested in going to the Yucatan. What kind of itinerary are you recommending for us?
So we're going to make it a little bit different from what the average tourist might do. A lot of people turn up to the Yucatan, and the Yucatan's split into two states. So there's Yucatan State and there's Quintana Roo. And Quintana Roo is where Cancun is. Mm-hmm. That's on the coastal side, on the Caribbean side. Whereas Yucatan State is on the west side, and that's more Gulf of Mexico. So although it's called the Yucatan Peninsula, it's two different states, but we're going to be talking just about Yucatan State, which is where Merida is, where Chichen Itza is, and some other really cool attractions that we'll get into. In terms of itinerary, the main two things we're going to look at as options, easy ways to get here from the US. You can either fly into Cancun from the US direct, or you can fly into Merida now, because there's quite a few flights coming in from Houston, from Miami. There's a few from Atlanta and Toronto in Canada. And also there's a really easy connection through Mexico City if you're coming from LA, perhaps. So either taking a route from Cancun one way to Merida and doing everything on the way, or the other direction, Merida to Cancun, then flying out, or doing a round trip between the two.
And when you say taking a route from there, you can either rent a car in Cancun and do that, which is what we did, or you could, there's a first-class bus and as well as a second-class bus, I assume, that go between the two places.
And they're actually really fantastic buses. They're incredibly affordable. The really nice ones, I mean, I haven't really been on a crap one, to be honest. They have ones that you can plug in your devices, so you can charge your devices while you're on there. They're all air conditioned. So you're not sitting on a chicken bus. You're sitting on a nice, comfortable bus that will take you where you want to go. And they're really fantastic.
Yeah, these are the ones that it'll be hard for you to ride Greyhound in the U.S. after you take one of these buses.
Exactly.
The standard is a little higher there than, and we actually have some of those kind of buses coming to the U.S. too, I understand. But that is not what we're talking about today. Excellent. So you are not recommending we just go to Cancun and stay in an all-inclusive resort then?
No, funnily enough.
As fun as that is, and we understand that there's definitely a time that you might want to go and do that, this region is so amazing and so versatile. I think if you jump in that car, you go around, you're just going to really get to experience what Mayan culture is, get a lot of history, a lot of the cenotes in the region. Some of these, they're really, really old. Some of them are going back, they say the cenotes were created when the meteor hit the Earth that killed the dinosaurs, all those millions.
65 million years ago.
Yeah. So there's a bit of a rumor going around. People say that when it hit, it created that big crater and it lifted the ground up and then put it back in a really weird manner. And then when the water rose, this is how the cenotes were formed. It's a myth. We don't know if it's actually true, but all the water started to go in through the different cracks and into these different sinkholes. And that's how you ended up getting all these beautiful cenote formations.
And we've been using the Mexican term because I don't know any English term for it, really. Sinkhole is the closest I can come to. But if you fly over the Yucatan, it looks like Swiss cheese. There are all sorts of holes in them, and most of those have water in them. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about cenotes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. And so there's thousands of them. And they can go from being like the size of a small well all the way up to the massive, beautiful ones that you might have seen if you look on Google Images or if you're looking up this particular region. There's a really beautiful cenote that is near Chichen Itza that's really famous called Itkil. That's one of the more well-known ones, but there are so many different ones in this region. It will astound you.
We'll be talking about some of those later. We've got some specific ones that not as many tourists go to that are well worth the trip.
Okay. And it is interesting to know that flying directly to Merida is an option now. And obviously check out the prices and make up your decision accordingly. And again, if you want to hear more about that eastern portion, go listen to the other episode. We do talk a little bit about Cancun, not so much. We don't recommend it in that episode either. And Playa del Carmen, which we do recommend. Although if you are listening to this in 2018, there's a travel advisory warning for Playa del Carmen, just because that's what we're doing this year on Amateur Traveler. Our timing really is bad. But
that's why we're not anywhere near Playa del Carmen. In fact, Merida, where we live, it's
happen to love Playa del Carmen and highly recommend going there. Cancun, not as much, mostly because it's a little less like Mexico and a little more like southern Florida. But Merida, we're going to start there. And you're not recommending we just do what we did, for instance, which was spend one really wonderful night in Merida and then move on, but staying there for a little bit.
Yeah, please don't come and spend one night. This is a really vibrant, amazing city. And I really think if people come and spend a little bit more time here, they're going to fall in love with it just like we have.
As I said before, it's been voted capital of culture for Latin America. And the actual city itself was founded in 1542. So it's one of the oldest cities in the Americas. Mm-hmm. And it was a Spanish colonial city, and it's still got a lot of that architecture that's come over the last few hundred years. So we've got huge mansions in all these bright colors along these boulevards. We've got the sort of almost Cuban feel that you might have seen in photos with houses on cobbled streets, which every single house is a different color. So you can walk around these back streets and just discover something new every time you go down the street, even if you've been down it before. We often...
I swear I see something different every time I go out of the house. It's like, wait, that wasn't here before, was it? And it's like, no, I think it has. It looks really old. It's got to be. It's always changing. You just always find something completely different. You go down a different street and you're like, well, I never saw that doorway before. Or look at this archway. And Merida's a really interesting city that actually behind every doorway is a secret that you wouldn't expect. So actually every winter time, quite often they will do home tours around Merida, and you can actually get a glimpse behind these doors and see some of the amazing homes that people have created here in Merida. And it will absolutely wow you. Just beautiful design, architecture, most of them really keeping with the traditional Yucatecan feel.
There's a specific tour you can do, and we can send you a link for that. The Merida English Library here, which is like a connection between the English and Spanish community, or Mexican community. They run a tour during those winter months. It's something you can actually do. It runs once a week, I think.
Mm-hmm. Every Wednesday.
Okay. And you mentioned winter. What season do you recommend coming to the Yucatan?
Absolutely winter. When it gets to those summer months, if you can hack it, then hey, come and visit. But it definitely gets up to about 42 degrees
Celsius. So I guess
over
that's
100
over
Fahrenheit. Yeah.
Over 100 Fahrenheit. So it's warm. It is very hot in the summer months, and you definitely want to have a place with a pool to be able to chill out during the day. But generally in the evenings from about, well, if you're a bit of a late bird like we are, from 10:30 onwards, and I can tell you stuff is still going on well into the night here. It's definitely a lot cooler then, but if you really want to get the most, definitely I'd say from November until about April are going to be the best months for you.
All right. Let's start our itinerary. We're starting in Merida. What are we seeing first?
Yeah, so let's assume that you've flown into Merida and you're going to maybe do a city tour the first day, because the city itself is so old and you've got all these beautiful cathedrals and churches. You would probably start off in the main square, and there's actually some free walking tours there. We can send you a link to that as well, which will give you a lot of information. You can spend 2 hours just walking around, and they'll tell you about the different buildings, what they were used for, this mixture of colonial history with French, Spanish, a little bit of Dutch, almost a little bit of English as well. It's quite interesting because this region had a lot of people coming in over the years. There was a lot of trade going on. They were trading the henequen, which they were using to make ropes. It's like cactus that they turned into ropes. They took the fibers from the cactus, and it made this city one of the richest in the world. at that time in the 19th century, which is why there's so many beautiful colonial buildings, because people had so much money. They were building these huge, huge mansions.
Well, my understanding is at the time it was more closely connected with Europe than it was with Mexico. I don't believe there was a road, for instance, that went out to the Yucatan at that time. And so you would travel by ship to the Yucatan, but they could just as easily, not as quickly, but just as easily ship their goods off to Europe, and did.
Yeah. And actually, Yucatan was independent from Mexico for quite a while in the 19th century. I'm not sure on the exact dates, but I think it was the mid-19th century when they became part of Mexico, after Mexico had already established itself as an independent country.
Yeah, I think you'll also find a lot of people in this region call this area Yucatan and everything else is Mexico. Yeah. So they still have that individual identity where they're like, no, we're different. Our culture here is different. Our food here is different. And the rest of that's Mexico. And everybody's welcome to come and go, and we welcome everyone, but they still kind of identify as really being Yucatecan.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned the main square, and I'm certainly going to recommend that if you go to the main square, you go there on at least one time on a Sunday.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes.
Because I don't know if it's every Sunday, but certainly we were told that Sundays is when there are basically a fiesta in the main square in the Zocalo, and it was fun. There were dancers, there were $1 street tacos that were probably the best meal I've had in Mexico, and that is not to put down any other meal I've had in Mexico, because I like the food in Mexico, but a $1 street taco is pretty darn amazing when it's the right taco.
Yeah, that's true. It is absolutely every Sunday. They will set up markets in the central square. They will have the traditional dancers out there, and they'll have a big band set up that will be playing for the dancers, and they do amazing things where they spin around with these trays of open beer bottles on their heads. And
that I did not see. Okay.
You missed that? It was really interesting.
It's curious because they're teenagers. It's all teenagers who are dressed up in traditional mine clothes, but they're dancing with open alcohol on their heads. It's really, really strange.
Mexico love their cerveza.
Yeah. I think that's at 1 p.m. and that's pretty much every single Sunday, but you can contact the tourism office just to check, because occasionally they have special events and they replace some of these things, but normally it's every Sunday.
Yeah. And of course, as you mentioned, they have all of the street food stalls set up as well. So take your pick, sit down and see what takes your fancy. There's lots of different foods to choose from.
I think eating's an important part of coming to Merida because every part of Yucatecan cuisine is represented here. And we've released this massive guide of over 50 different things that are specifically Yucatecan foods rather than Mexican foods. We've tried all of them. It's quite amazing. It's just different cuisine.
Yeah, you really won't find nachos or burritos or anything like that on the menu.
You can find them, but it's not Yucatecan food.
You'll find tacos.
Yeah. You'll definitely find tacos, that's for sure. But some of those other things that you might expect, you might be surprised to find that they won't be on a traditional menu. The Yucatecan food, well, yes, you can get amazing tacos with variety of fillings, but if you're expecting to come here and get a burrito, you might be very disappointed.
We might as well talk about food here. We'll link to your guide with the 50 different things to eat. We'll probably not go through all 50 here. But are there some recommendations while we're here in Merida that you would recommend?
Oh, absolutely. Let's do a few really specific ones. A very, very, very popular dish that was invented in the late 19th century or possibly early 20th century was panuchos. It's a taco on steroids, basically. You've taken a corn tortilla, and instead of just using it plain, they stuff it with beans inside, and then they deep fry it till it goes just a little bit crispy, but not too crispy because you can still fold it, but crispy enough that when you bite into it, it's just got this beautiful oily crispiness to it.
When you put tortillas on a hot plate, they actually bubble up in a way that makes them crispy and soft and crunchy all at the same time. And then when they take it off that heat, it's still a little bit, I guess you'd say bubbly-ish.
For a tostada.
Yeah.
But for panuchos, deep fried rather than being put on the hot plate.
But it still bubbles up in that way.
Yeah. I don't know, it just forms this layer because the beans are inside the tortilla. And so it's just this almost flaky bits on top that are just falling off and they're perfectly crispy. And then they fill it with, well, there's a few different things they can fill it with. The traditional thing is just turkey, roasted turkey, and a bit of salad and maybe avocado. But the absolute best one that you can get here is they fill it with lechon, which is slow-cooked pork.
Right.
And they actually have two types of pork here. Lechon, which is very famous around the world. You can get it in the Philippines and other places, really slow cooked. And then cochinita is a very specific Yucatecan version of that, where they cook the pork underground, they wrap it in banana leaves, and they've marinated this huge pork shoulder in achiote, which is like a red paste. And
spicy red paste.
Yeah, it's not
like
hot
burn your
chili
face
or anything.
spicy.
You can add habanero to it afterwards when you serve it, but when it comes out originally, it doesn't have to be that spicy at all. You put that in a panucho, either the lechon or the cochinita, and it's this amazingly juicy pulled pork inside this slightly oily but perfectly crispy tortilla. And all of those flavors just go together, and I just can't stop eating these things.
It's a very messy meal. It's not a first date meal, but it's definitely delicious.
We've got a specific recommendation of somewhere to go, so you can actually go and eat this. We've eaten so many of these, and the absolute best one we've had is at a little place called La Lupita in Santiago Market, Mercado Santiago it's called. You can look it up on Google Maps. It's easy to find. It's right in the middle of this little local market, municipal market, where they sell the fruit and veg and meat and some crafts as well. They've got machines in there that make tortillas. You can actually watch them making, like, it puts out like 2 tortillas a second. It's just powering these things out. It's crazy. You can walk around and see all of that, and then you can sit down at this little stall, blue plastic tablecloths. It's not fancy, but the food is amazing. Order yourself 2 lechon panuchos or cochinita panuchos, and you will not be disappointed.
Excellent. Any other recommendations for food?
One thing I have absolutely fallen in love with in this region is a dish called queso relleno. And that just literally means like stuffed cheese.
Right.
And it's an interesting...
Already sounds good, right?
You had me at cheese, so...
Yeah.
Exactly. You can't go wrong. But this is actually an interesting influence that came from the Dutch. Back in the old days, a lot of the wealthy people, they have like these Dutch Edam cheeses, and they used to just scoop out the inside, and that was considered to be the better part of the cheese.
It was like a whole ball the size of a small football.
Yeah.
And it's all cheese, and they scooped out the middle bit because that's the best bit.
The servants and cooks and all that, they would take this Edam ball shell and use it to do their own cooking. And what they would do is they would stuff it full of spiced mint that would all get stuffed into this cheese ball, and then they would cook up the cheese ball so it would get a little bit soft, a little bit chewy, but not bad chewy, in a good way. And then
firm and delicious.
And then they cover it in this really traditional blanco sauce, or a white sauce. And then today we've seen a lot, they put a lot of this extra special tomato sauce on top. And it can also be served with olives, which is an interesting addition to this particular dish. But you cut into it and you just get the cheese, the spiced mints, you get that blanco sauce, and the whole flavor profile is absolutely to die for. It is 100% my favorite dish, and I've tried it in so many different places around the region because I just decided to go on a mission to find the best queso relleno in the Yucatan.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a salty, wonderful comfort food because it's covered in this sauce, and you add that tomato on top that gives it a little bit of sweetness almost. And the cheese, this Edam cheese, is maybe not like Edam you get in the US or in Europe. It's actually quite strong flavor. It's not a mild cheese at all. And you put all that together, and it's a wonderful, wonderful salt hit. It's brilliant.
Excellent. Anything else we want to talk about food, otherwise we'll go back to sites?
Shall we say a specific place that you can get this, which is
Sure.
favorite one after trying about 20 different places for this particular meal? We really do like it that much. There's a restaurant in central Merida called Manjar Blanco, which is spelled Manjar. So it's like manjar, but it's pronounced manjar. We'll get you a link for that. They do traditional Yucatecan food, 100%. That's all their menu is about. But they brought Yucatecan food forward just a little bit. So it's like they've maintained the traditions, but they've made a few little of their own twists to things, and they're doing it at the next level. I love all the food there. We've eaten the whole menu pretty much, and it's an amazing restaurant.
Excellent. One last food recommendation I would have is, while you're in the Zocalo, look for the Marqueseta vendor, which is a Cheesy crepe wonderfulness, I would have to
Yeah,
say.
so once again, they're using that Edam cheese that we were talking
Oh, is
about.
it the Edam cheese? Okay, I did not know
It's the
that.
same cheese and the macasita.
They're wonderful. Excellent. What else are we doing in Merida?
You can easily spend every evening just walking around. It's an all-day thing. During the day, people are hanging around. Maybe there's some events going on. In the evening, it's buzzing with people. You can go to all the different restaurants around there if you want. We've got so many different restaurant recommendations, not just the ones we mentioned, that maybe we should link out to that instead, because I don't think we can talk about them all.
But an interesting thing they do on the weekends in the evenings is they will actually close down one of the streets. And so a lot of the restaurants sort of spill out onto the streets and it becomes a walking street.
Uh-huh.
They set up bands and everything, and there'll be people dancing in the street and people eating and enjoying themselves. And that's a really interesting thing to check out as well, because I don't know, I find it really special that Mexico is really happy to just close down streets. They really don't care about how it affects the traffic. They're more interested in the enjoyment that the people are having. So they will close down the streets to let the restaurants sit out under the stars, or they will close down the main boulevard here in Merida. They do it one Saturday night.
First Saturday night of the month, and every single Sunday from 8 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And
they allow people to hire bicycles, and they have everything from single bicycles all the way up to 4-people bicycles. I don't even know what a 4-person bicycle is called.
We would call that a Surrey.
Oh, there is a name.
Oh. And you can just ride up and down the boulevard, going past all these beautiful mansions, and it's tree-lined streets and the
cafes all the way along, so you can
stop for a coffee.
Coffees and croissants and things, as well as some Mexican food.
And a really famous ice cream parlor as well.
Yes, the Sorberia.
Okay. Are there other things we want to direct people to in Merida that don't involve food?
Food and nightlife is definitely one of the most important things to be here. So the rest of the stuff is going to be anything cultural you want to go and see during the day. There are churches everywhere. If you're a fan of architecture, San Cristobal in the south, it's about 4 or 5 blocks south of the central square. So it's easy enough to walk there in 5 or 10 minutes. That church is beautiful. It's one of the newer churches. So it's, instead of being built like the cathedral was in the 17th century, this one was built in the 19th century, I believe. That's got this huge dome at the front, and they've often got colorful banners up around it as well. I love that church. You can just sit in the square out there and have a coffee and look at that and people watch.
Any arts or sport or museums you would recommend?
It is a very artsy city, but you will find a lot of the time it has tended to be the expats. So there's a big Canadian artist community here, and it is also expanding out into the locals as well. And there are a lot of art galleries that you can go and visit. So they do have one Friday every month. They will open up all of the arts studios, and you can go around from studio to studio checking out the latest artwork that they're working on, have a chat to the artists. I think they have some wine and cheese at every stop. Can't go wrong with wine and cheese. It's all about food and drink here in Merida.
Is there a particular area where the studios are?
That's in the Centro region.
Around Santa Ana, Parque Santa Ana, there's a few really nice ones. So just opposite the park, on Street 60. They're called Calles here. That's the street. So Calle 60, there's an art studio right there. I haven't got the name to hand, but I will get that to you for the notes. And there's a couple more just along that street as well from there. And there's little ones popping up all the time. There's a lot of street art around as well. If you jump in a taxi and drive around a bit, you'll see the street art. But walking around the streets and seeing all those colorful buildings, also, it's a delight. Just hanging around, seeing that, taking photos. We love to just go and photograph all the old Beetle cars, the Volkswagen Beetles, the Bugs. There's lots of those here because they still make them in Mexico.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't realize that a lot of the V-dubs were being manufactured in Mexico, and there are a lot of them still around. So you can get some of those really iconic shots of this beautifully restored V-dub in front of a colorful building, and it's perfect for any photographer. They will just love going around and getting these really iconic Merida shots.
Yeah. And for a quick museum recommendation, and some people would love to learn a bit more about the region while they're here. The best museum is not in the Centro. It's a little bit north. You'd need to take a taxi or a bus. It's Museo del Mundo Maya. So that's the Museum of the Mayan World.
It's also known affectionately by locals as the Rubber Band Museum because it kind of looks like a ball of rubber bands.
Okay.
It's an interesting design.
It's a strange green metal structure that, it does look like a ball of rubber bands. It's very odd. There you'll learn all about the archaeological history of the region. So you can learn all this about the cenotes that we mentioned earlier and how they were formed 65 million years ago, as well as the history of the Mayan people and how they came to this region and how the Spanish colonized the region and how that obviously changed it drastically.
Yeah, it's definitely really interesting to go to, and there is a lot of English available. But if you do happen to be able to read a bit of Spanish, you will definitely get a lot more out of that museum. But going there just speaking English or reading English, you definitely will have a wonderful experience.
Okay. Are there other things we want to recommend in Merida, or is it time to start doing day trips?
Oh, we better get on to some other stuff, I think. We're going to fill at least 2 days of Merida just with what we talked about. If you like food, then you're going to be eating all afternoon because people eat lunch here at about 3:00 and you have a big, big lunch. So it's not quite the same times as you'd eat in the US. So it's an all-day eating thing. If you're a foodie, you're definitely going to spend a bit more time in Merida. And if you're not, you might head out and do a few more activities outside the city.
Okay. And what activities would you recommend?
All right, let's start with wildlife. I reckon we should talk about Celestun.
Yes, they have recently just opened up a brand new highway, which makes it much easier to get straight out to Celestun from Merida. And it's actually one of my favorite beaches of the region. While a lot of people imagine Mexico as the crystal blue Caribbean waters, the Yucatan region it's not quite as blue and not quite as gorgeous as those other beaches. But I think Celestun is definitely the prettiest of the region. And one of the main highlights of going out there is, one, incredible seafood. Got to talk about food. More food. Two, it's actually where you can go and spot flamingos in the wild. They have this incredible natural wildlife sanctuary, and sometimes, especially this time of year, which is actually March.
November to March is peak season for flamingos here.
Yeah, so you can go out there and you can see thousands upon thousands of these incredible birds just all out there feeding and doing their thing. And there's boat tours that go out there every single day, all year round, actually. So if you go at other times of the year, you're not going to see as many, but you will still probably spot one or two. But this time of year, you will see thousands of pink just flying through the sky and in the water. It really is an incredible experience.
Yeah, and top tip that we learned from a local is you should go when it's low tide because that's when they all come to eat. So you will see the most. And so it's not about the time of day you go. It's just about looking online to see what the tide time is and making sure it's low tide.
And I'm assuming we're recommending people just rent a car and drive out there, or are there other ways that you would recommend if people... I would say driving in the Yucatan is not difficult and certainly not a problem. A little more difficult for you who are driving on the other side of the road, but for Americans who are driving on the same side of the road, not so much of a problem. Although we did run into one or two times where it was useful to understand some Spanish. The people who we were driving with, were stopped by a roadblock and they just kind of pointed to our car and said, "We're with them."
Yeah, there are a couple of roadblocks, but usually if they see that you're a tourist, they don't give you any hassle. They just go, keep on your way and you'll be fine. But definitely hiring a car is a great way to see the Yucatan. And the roads are very well kept.
Outside of the city, the roads are perfect. Most of them are quite new. All of those main highways, you can drive fast. There's very little traffic. Inside of Merida, you might find it a little bit stressful to drive. Unless you're from New York or something, then it's probably normal. But people are a bit pushy.
I would say we don't really want a car while we're in the city as much. But yeah.
No.
But to get out of the city, it is great. If you are traveling on a budget, you can take the bus. I think it's maybe $4 or $5 to take the bus to Celestun.
Okay.
You can do a day trip there. If you're taking the bus, it's a much longer trip. So taking a car makes it easy to do a day trip. If by bus, you might want to stay overnight to get the most out of it. And then you can eat more seafood, which is what we do. They've got the biggest prawns, the biggest shrimp in the region. They are almost the size of your hand. I've never seen shrimp this big because there's a lagoon there as part of the biosphere, and they get the shrimp straight out of that from what I'm told. They're huge, and it'll only cost you maybe $9 or $10 for this massive plate of shrimp the size of your hand. It's crazy.
Okay. Other day trips.
We'd be remiss if we didn't mention Chichen Itza. We mentioned it at the start of the episode. Chichen Itza is just 2 hours drive along the new superhighway from Merida. So it makes it very easy. You can, of course, also get a bus tour or take a bus over there. But as we said, driving's easiest. This, as everybody probably knows already, it's a very famous Mayan pyramid. It's been nicely restored on one side, so it sort of glimmers in the sun. They've made it look like it would have looked a few hundred years ago before it was abandoned. And then on the other side of it, it's just been left as it was found. So it's sort of a bit more of a ruin. So you can see both aspects of what that pyramid would look like. And of course, it's a sacred, important space to the Mayans. And the Aztecs took it over at some point as well, didn't they?
Yeah. Also, a really interesting thing about Chichen Itza is the football court. Because, of course, football, the old Aztec football game, is a really interesting part of history. A bit more of a violent part of the history, as people would remember, because we haven't actually figured out it's either the captain of the winning team or the captain of the losing team that gets beheaded. I actually think the rumor is that we heard was it's actually the captain of the winning team, because
that's the
reason
more
they played
recent
the football
thought
game was to get rain. They wanted it to rain. They wanted the gods to be happy. So to give them the sacrifice of the winning captain would make the gods so happy that they would give them rain, and then they would have food and be prosperous. So that's the rumor we heard. We don't know if it's 100% accurate, but it makes a pretty good story.
Yeah.
And actually, coming back to Merida, just very quickly on that note, every Friday night at 8 p.m. in the main square, they do a reenactment of that football game. So you'll see how they actually use their hits.
Sacrifice.
Without the beheading.
Okay.
Without the beheading. They do have a bit of a fiery conclusion, I do have to say.
Yeah, a lot of tourists, this is an important tip as well, a lot of tourists leave that football game before the end because they're like, oh, I've seen it now. And they don't realize that after about 40 minutes of the main game, they light the ball on fire, and that's when it gets exciting. So don't go to the start of it and then leave. Make sure you wait for the fireball bit. It's really fun. But back to Chichen Itza. Good tip for Chichen Itza is you want to beat the cruise ship passengers who are coming off the boats and coming across on bus tours.
Yep.
And all the other people coming from Cancun. They all turn up around 10 a.m., maybe 10:30 a.m. So you can get into the site from 8 a.m., and that's what we try to do if we take people there. You can stay maybe at a small hotel nearby, and then you can go straight in the second they open in the morning. And by doing that, we actually got photos of the pyramid without a single other human being in the photo, which was nice, because by lunchtime, it's just people everywhere.
It does get crowded. It is the one Mayan spot that I think that gets I was going to say the most crowded. Tulum is a smaller spot, a very spectacular site, but not spectacular ruins because it's right on the ocean. And it also gets quite a lot of tour buses. And then in that region, the other site that I know that you guys haven't been to, that is my favorite, is Coba. And again, same thing, get there before the tour buses show up, but in Coba, last I was there at least, you could still climb the pyramids. And so it's also a large enough site that you rent a bicycle to ride between these dispersed things. So you're riding through the jungle. And at one point there, at 9 o'clock in the morning, I was standing on top of a Mayan pyramid all by myself in the middle of the jungle. And it was quite spectacular to have that kind of experience. And you won't get that experience at Chichen Itza, but you can get some really good shopping done at Chichen Itza because it's both a architectural ruin and an outdoor market. So,
yes, there are a lot of people hear that jaguar sort of rawr, rawr.
That's right.
And you're like, what is that noise? And it's like this little thing they blow into. But yeah, you can definitely go home with plenty of souvenirs from Chichen Itza, that's for sure.
Some decent pottery. We actually picked up some things. So it is silly. I mean, it really does have quite a few vendors, but some of them selling the cheap souvenirs and some of them selling interesting handiwork.
It's an unmissable spot if you are coming to the Yucatan. You've never been here before. You've really got to go to Chichen Itza. Spectacular.
Excellent. Where to next?
Okay, so from Chichen Itza, you can actually maybe do a multi-day, multi-overnight trip from Merida out to Chichen Itza and then to the nearby city of Valladolid, which is on the eastmost side of the Yucatan state, just before you get into Cancun area.
Okay.
This is also an old colonial city with a beautiful cathedral and central square and the same sort of colorful buildings that you'll see in Merida. And it was named Valladolid because that was the capital of Spain at the time in the 16th century. I think it was 1543 when this city was founded. And so they named it as an honor to the Spanish homeland. It was built directly on top of a Mayan city. So it was unceremoniously plonked on top of a place that was already inhabited. Just like in Merida, which I think I didn't mention earlier, but they destroyed one of the pyramids and took the rocks to build the cathedral. So the cathedral in Merida is made from many stones that were used originally in a pyramid that was near Merida. And I'm pretty sure they did the same sort of thing in Valladolid as well. You can still visit the cenote there, and we talked about cenotes before, but this one in Valladolid is actually right in the middle of the city. So you can literally walk from the cathedral about 5 or 10 minutes, and then you can go down into this huge, wide open cenote. It must be at least 200 feet across. It's one of the really big ones. That's called Cenote Zaki. And Zaki is actually the name that the city was called by the Mayans before it got transplanted and turned into Valladolid. And so it's a really nice city to stay overnight. Just like Merida, it's very easy to sit outside on a street corner, watch the world go by and have a drink and eat some Yucatecan food. It's got that ambience that you love because it's not like Playa del Carmen where it's been built all sort of new. This is a really traditional city with the cobblestones and everything. It's beautiful.
Excellent. Yeah, I did not get there. It looks beautiful.
Oh, it is. We can send you a couple of photos as well if you want for the show notes.
Sure.
All right, we'll need to remember all the stuff we need to send you. And one other thing to do whilst you're in Valladolid, as well as that main cenote right in the middle of the city, there's another one that's just about a 5 or 10 minute drive. Well, actually, there's two. I'm going to quickly mention two. One of our favorites is called San Lorenzo Oshman. This one, it's not just a cenote, it's also a hacienda, which a hacienda is the old plantation buildings where they used to send people out to collect the henequen to make these ropes that we mentioned earlier on. So this building's just been restored. It's bright, sort of red colored. It really stands out. And next to that, there's this huge open cenote, which goes down very, very deep. So when you walk around the top, you look down and it's maybe about 75 feet down till you hit the water. You walk down a very long staircase and then you can go swimming in that. And the water is this crystal blue that then keeps going down another 90 feet or 100 feet or so. It's very, very deep. So you wear a life jacket when you go in, and it's beautiful. I mean, that's probably one of the best ones. Right?
Yeah, it has one of the open tops, and it has these tree trunks that are just dangling down, the sides of it. And it's when you picture what a cenote is, like it's your picture perfect cenote experience that hasn't been manufactured. It's just absolutely the way that it is, and it's gorgeous to just go down. You'll find that going down the staircase, it's significantly cooler. So you'll go from the heat of the Mexican day and you'll start getting cooler and cooler as you go down into the cenote. But the interesting thing about cenotes is they all are at a very standard temperature. So no matter what time of year you do go, even if you are going in winter, it's still going to be warm here in Mexico compared to American standards, that's for sure. But you can always go for a swim because the cenotes are all around about the same temperature all year round. So it's always quite pleasant. And I hate cold water, but I'll always get in and go for a swim in a cenote.
Well, I would say when we were swimming in a cenote in the summer, it was cool. Now, it was refreshing because it was hot and sticky out, but it wasn't like it was warm water.
No, it's not warm. It's just that it stays warm enough the whole year. It's because of that constant temperature that you don't have to be afraid of jumping in. It's good all year round. One other place just next to Valladolid, another cenote that we love, is called Cenote Soytun, spelled Suytun. And this one, although it's 99% natural, they've put this walkway into the middle of the cenote like a platform. It almost looks like a ceremonial platform like you'd get at a rock concert, one of those catwalk things that sticks out the front of a rock concert, and then there's like a circular section in the middle. It's really fun for photography because you go stand in the middle and they've got the lights just beam through. It's an underground cave cenote, so there's only a little bit of light coming in. The water is crystal blue in there as well, very see-through, transparent, and the light just shines through this hole in the ceiling, and it makes this beautiful beam of light right next to this platform. Very cool for photos. Just try and avoid the bus trips. If you see a bus in the car park, you just got to wait a few minutes for them to leave so that you can go and get your own photo without loads of people in it.
Well, and you mentioned an underground cave. So this whole region is not just riddled with cenotes, but also with caves. It's all limestone below. And most of these connect, and some of them connect with underground rivers and caves and things like that. So, in fact, I remember when we were at Uxmal, which we haven't talked about yet, on one of the other Mayan ruins, and we were doing one of the tours, they were saying one of the problems that the Mayans had was when they sacrificed to the rain god, which they did only, I think, later on in their history after they were influenced by some of the other peoples of Mexico, they think. But they would celebrate Tuchuk, the rain god, and they would sacrifice people into the cenote, which they thought was connected to the gods. And unfortunately, even if it wasn't the one they were drinking from, it was connected to the one they were drinking from. And so quite often then, after a while, after years, the city would get sickness and they would abandon the city because they thought the gods no longer favored this spot. And so some of the places that we now know of as ruins were abandoned by the Mayans. They basically abandoned them before the coming of the Europeans.
Exactly, yeah. As you mentioned, yeah, Uxmal is specifically known for the fact that it was abandoned for many, many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they found it and cleared up the whole area, they were so surprised at how vast and how, well, actually preserved that particular area was. It almost was like they just up and left. They just basically took like whatever they could just grab and just left. Like,
well, the guide that we had when we went to Uxmal believed that it's because the access to water at Uxmal is a little more difficult. And so when they had a few very dry years in a row, he believes that's why they went, well, we just can't stay here. And everyone just had to leave. There just wasn't enough water for the city. That was his theory anyway. I don't know if it's true, but it's definitely interesting.
But we should speak a little bit more about Uxmal. You will find a lot of people, especially expats in this region, feel that they prefer Uxmal to Chichen Itza.
Doesn't have the crowds.
Well, it doesn't have the crowds. There's that. But also, you can go there and just get some really fascinating history because Uxmal was really the seat of science. If you get a tour guide that really knows what he's talking about, he can tell you about just how amazing they were at science and astronomy and every inch of the temples and
the way the buildings were constructed, the angle they're at, it all is designed around where the stars are going to be, where Venus is going to be. They have a building, I believe it's called the Governor's Palace. I think it's it's one of the buildings that's up on the hill opposite the main pyramid, across the valley a little bit. And that's set up in a way where I think it's only maybe every 148 years or something the Venus would align.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact years, that's probably wrong. But the fact that it's such a huge period of time that the person who constructed it would never see this come to fruition. And they actually still built this around the idea that this building and this part of the building on this day, every 148 years, you would see Venus directly through this certain part of the art. It's crazy the amount of detail they must have known about the movement of the planets and the stars that they could actually construct buildings around these theories. And still, they're working today. You can still see them. And people do come to places like Chichen Itza and Uxmal for these very specific events, like the solstice, to see how the building changes and how it lights up the building and how the stars are seen through them on these days.
Yeah, summer and winter solstice is a really important time to come and visit any of the Mayan ruins. It's Chichen Itza or Uxmal. There's something going to be happening that's been created by the Mayans in those olden times that celebrates the solstice. So while it will probably be a bit busy tourism-wise, it definitely is an amazing time of year to come and visit.
When we should say that Uxmal is directly south of Merida, not as far as Chichen Itza is, and it's the other UNESCO World Heritage Site in the state of the Yucatan. There are 5 on the Yucatan Peninsula. The other three, one being Campeche, which would be the next state south of Merida. And Campeche is a beautiful city, a beautiful colonial city on the coast facing inland, facing to the west. We spent a very beastly hot day there one summer, but it is a beautiful city. And then the other 2 being further to the west and to the south, a little further away from where we're talking about now.
Yeah, it's easy to get to Uxmal from Merida in about an hour's drive. So it's especially if you're going in the morning when there's not too much traffic. Very easy
We
drive.
just definitely recommend when you go out there, make sure you take a hat, or there will be a lady out the front willing to sell you a hat. And make sure you stay hydrated as well. While there is some shade, there is not an exceptional amount of shade out there. So take a sunbrella, as I always like to take, and make sure you have plenty of water because it can get pretty hot out there.
Yep. And at Uxmal, you can also climb one of the pyramids, which you can't do at Chichen Itza anymore.
Oh, that's right. Mm-hmm.
So that's quite nice. You can climb one of the pyramids that's further to the back of the site, and you can see the main pyramid and the rest of the site very clearly from the top of that. It's a good vista for taking photos.
Excellent.
So this is one of our other favorite day trips from outside of Merida. So if you're staying in Merida, you can head out to the Yellow City, which is called Izamal.
Oh, yes. Okay. I almost brought it up.
Every single building in the city is yellow. The whole center, everything has been painted yellow. I believe it was due to the Pope visiting.
I think that's right.
A few years ago, and so they decided to paint every single building. And just walking around those streets, again, it's got that colonial feel. You've got cobble streets in places. You've got Central Park. Got a beautiful convent in the middle.
You can go on a horse and carriage ride, and all the horses have their little sun hats on. Their little ears are poking up between in the hats, and they got their hats on. It's very cute.
Beautiful little town.
There's also an excellent Yucatecan restaurant there called Caniche, where you can try any of the dishes we talked about earlier, like panuchos, queso relleno, and a few other specialities.
You can actually also see some of the ladies in their traditional clothing making the tortillas by hand, which is really special to see as well.
Any recommendations you would have on places to stay in the Yucatan?
So for these trips, staying in Merida is very handy because, as I say, you can explore the city, but you can also do each of these day trips around Izamal or Uxmal and Celestun. And then if you're going to go over to Chichen Itza, I believe it's nicer to go and stay in Valladolid rather than having to drive all the way back to Merida. So you could stay right next to Chichen Itza if you want. There's a nice little place opposite Cenote Iquil, which I think we mentioned that cenote earlier. There's a very affordable place there, or there's some really nice sort of high-end hotels behind Chichen Itza that are walking distance. So you can actually get up in the morning and just walk straight into the site at 8 a.m.
In Valladolid or even in Merida, Airbnb is incredibly popular, and you can get some very nice places in both of those cities if Airbnb is something you enjoy. Or also, Merida has some really beautiful boutique hotels that you can stay in a really lovely little room. You'll get your breakfast included. There'll be pools that you can swim in. And one in particular, the Diplomat boutique hotel here in Merida, they only have 4 rooms, and the owners really make sure to take care of their guests. They do fresh made breakfasts, which is like breakfast tortillas, but they also use a lot of the local foods that you can get at the market. So you might find a few things that you can put into your breakfast tacos that are a little bit different, but also very, very local.
Yeah, I was looking for where we had stayed. We stayed in a boutique hotel about 3 blocks from the main plaza in Merida, but finding the name, but I know we found that one and also a wonderful little boutique hotel in Izamal that was a horse ranch just by looking for on the top rated things on TripAdvisor, finding the things that were not the chain hotels. In Uxmal, we stayed in the hotel that was built for the archaeologists originally, which is right there, walking distance from the park.
And of course, in Merida, the Centro is a protected area. They haven't really built that many chain hotels anyway. It is just lots of boutique hotels and Airbnbs. So it's very easy to find the more traditional accommodation like that that's beautifully decorated colonial buildings rather than the cookie cutter sort of places.
Well, and I think staying there where you're in the Central District is highly recommended versus trying to stay at some more familiar Western style hotel anyway.
Yeah.
Excellent. As we start to wrap this up, you're standing in the most beautiful spot in the Yucatan. Where are you standing? What are you looking at?
A cenote.
We mentioned before San Lorenzo Oshman cenote. That is my absolute favorite one. We've actually been to about 50 cenotes now over the year, and that's definitely the most beautiful. The water, the blueness, it just azure perfection. You stand in the cenote, you look up at the light coming in, the trees hanging down the side. It's amazing.
Also, I have to say, sitting, having a nice cold beer on the beach in Celestun is a very happy place of mine as well.
Okay, excellent. And I put a link in the show notes to my recommendations of 8 places to see in the Yucatan outside Cancun, which includes a couple places we haven't talked about. In the other episode, we talked about the Ruta Puc, so listen to that episode for that, which is down by Uxmal. But one thing I did want to point out, because we went to there based on that recommendation, was the Grutas de Leltun, or the Cave of Leltun, which is a cave down by Uxmal, which has 10,000-year-old cave art. That was fascinating. Although when you think of caves in the U.S., you think of going down someplace cold. This was someplace that was hot and sticky in the summertime. And so even though you were in a cave, we came out so wet that you could have hosed us off and we would have been drier. Going to a cave in the tropics is a little different experience, but still fascinating to see this old cave art from 10,000 years ago.
Yeah, everything in Mexico is humid.
Yeah.
It's just everything. So
good for your pores. Yeah. One thing that makes you laugh out loud and say only in the Yucatan.
You can walk into a cantina, which is the traditional bars that they have here, and you'll walk through these big saloon doors and you'll see some Yucatecan guy sitting at the bar, and he will just jump up and he will welcome you and he'll offer up his seat, and they're so friendly and so welcoming that you're like, no, we don't want your seat, it's okay. And he's just like, please, I'm so excited to have you here. Please, can I buy you a beer? I don't know, they're just so friendly. And when you walk into some of these tiny cantinas, they're so excited to see tourists in there that they're just overjoyed. And if they speak a little bit of English, they just can't wait to have a conversation with you.
Merida's a real city. It's a real living city. It's a commercial capital. So as well as this beautiful historic area, it's not packed with tourists like Playa del Carmen and Cancun are. Right. So some of these bars, they really only see a tourist in there maybe once a month or something. And when you go in, they're genuinely happy to see you.
When you walk down the street, you don't have people hassling you to go on tours or go and do this. Like, you can just walk down the street in peace. You might have someone walk up and be like, hey, you want to buy a shirt? And you're like, no, thank you. And they're like, all right. And they just keep going on their way.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize the Yucatan in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
I would say vibrant.
Mm-hmm. The color or the culture?
Everything.
Okay.
Everything. Color, culture. It just glows. It's an amazing area.
Vibrant, delicious, hot.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Excellent.
But the heat is very welcome if you're on a vacation for a week and you want to go swimming at the beach or whatever. The heat is perfect.
Well, and I usually at this point say, if we had to recommend your best post that people read to learn more about the Yucatan, what would it be? You've already mentioned the 50 things to eat. Is there another post you would recommend besides that?
Yeah, we actually released the ultimate guide to Merida, Mexico, which is about
18,000 words.
Yes.
And it's free. It's free, and you can also grab yourself a tourism map. We've put together a map of all our favorite spots, all our favorite cenotes and restaurants, and it's just like a Google Map overlay thing. So you can grab a copy of that from the article, and then everywhere we've mentioned in this is listed on there, so that makes it really easy to find as well.
And more.
Yeah, a lot more.
Excellent. Well, our guests again have been Megsy and Tommo from foodfuntravel.com. You can see how the food made its way into their new rebranded blog name there. Thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for the Yucatan.
We do. We love it so much, and we really hope we can inspire people to come and visit, because it's really a fantastic place with friendly people, and you'll really just love it here.
One quick announcement, and that is the signups for the trip in 2019 from Johannesburg and Kruger National Park through Botswana up to Victoria Falls. That signup is available right now. You can start signing up for that trip, and there may or may not still be some spots for the trip to Central Europe coming up here in 2018. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.